My name is Kelly Orians,
and I'm Deirdre Enright.
and so we are here to chat with you about criminal law and juvenile justice. We're both clinical professors, so we won't really be able to answer a whole lot of questions about the more doctrinal courses. And usually we have Crystal Shin with us, who's the director of the Holistic Juvenile Defense Clinic. So if you have any questions about juvenile justice work in the Holistic Defense Clinic, we can try to answer some of them, but we'd encourage you to reach out to Crystal, who's totally available for emails and et cetera. So I direct the Decarceration and Community Reentry Clinic, which is now in its 5th semester. I moved up here from New Orleans a few years ago, and so I'm still relatively new to Virginia, figuring out the lay of the land. My clinic works in Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Louisiana. And we focus on sort of the spectrum of the criminal legal system involvement, starting with post-conviction. We do post-conviction representation in DC through the Incarceration Reduction Amendment Act, where we do resentencing hearings for people who are sentenced to more than 15 years. This is DC's response to Graham, Miller, and Montgomery, which made life without parole unconstitutional for people under the age of 18, although they actually expanded it up to the age of 25. Then we work here in Virginia. We do parole cases for people who are eligible for parole consideration. We abolished parole in Virginia back in 1995, but we still have some people who are eligible under the old law, and juvenile lifers as well, former juvenile lifers. And then in Louisiana, we do post-conviction representation through a partnership with the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office Civil Rights Division, which is a really interesting, innovative model, different from a conviction integrity unit that you might have heard of before. They focus on wrongful convictions that are both factual innocence as well as any cases that resulted through the use of a law that's been disproportionately applied to defendants of color, as well as cases where prosecutorial misconduct resulted in overcharging or over-sentencing. Then on the other side, we work with people returning from incarceration to Albemarle, Charlottesville. We run community drop-in clinics. One we do is an expungement clinic. All we do is expungements through that clinic. We do that in partnership with all of the system stakeholders that have to be involved in expunging a record. So that's the police, the clerk of court, the judges, and we also work with legal aid and pro bono attorneys. And we bring students once a semester down into downtown to draft expungement petitions, file them in court, and follow them through the system. Then we work with a coalition of reentry organizations through an event called the Reentry One Stop, which occurs every other month. Usually it occurs about twice a semester. We go down to the Carver Rec Center at the Jefferson School, and we table alongside 15 to 20 different organizations where we do surveys with people recently released from prison and give them $20 in exchange for their time so that we can learn more about the experience of living with a conviction in Virginia. And then we also provide community-based drop-in legal services that require 1 to 3 visits with a client in order to resolve something that might be small but very significant in terms of their ability to be successful as they define it in their reentry journey. Lastly, we work with an organization called Resilience Education, which was started at the Darden School about 10 years ago. They train MBA students to go into prisons in Virginia and teach business classes. And we created a parallel program where law students can go into Virginia prisons and teach business law classes. And actually, we go a little bit outside the business law area. We focus on housing discrimination and other court debt related and other reentry legal matters as well. So we're piloting that, finally getting into the prisons after 5 years of creating the 5 semesters of creating the curriculum next month. And hopefully if we don't piss off the wrong people, we will get invited back, and it would be an opportunity for you all to earn pro bono hours going in and teaching those classes inside the women's prison, which is about 30 minutes from here, so much more accessible than some of the other prisons across the state.
So, and Kelly, I'm Deirdre Enright, and we're going to try and do quick summaries of our clinics so that you guys can ask tons of questions afterwards. So I'm going to try not to miss anything, and I'm going to try not to talk too fast. So I came here 15 years ago to start the Innocence Project and helped direct that for 13 years, and it was fantastic. Loved it, loved every minute of it. But I have to admit, and I found the reason I decided to move on and put it into younger, better hands and was that I was really despondent over the fact that all the same things that put people into prisons were still happening, and that the law hadn't changed, and that so we still have, you know, terrible eyewitnesses, but the law about how they come to court hadn't changed, and we have prosecutorial and police misconduct, but there's still no ramifications for anybody when they engage in it, and we have junk science, and now we have new junk science, and you know, so I just started thinking I need to do a clinic that tries to solve some of the problems. And so my clinic is called the Project for Informed Reform, but the clinic students went rogue this week and said that we're going to rename it, and they renamed it behind my back. So it's going to have a new name, and I can't remember what it was, but so when you go sign up for it, which you will, just look for my name. It'll have some new name. Hopefully there'll be no curse words in the title, but there might be. So here's the couple of projects that we're working on. In the fall semester, there was a prosecutor in Norfolk, newly elected. There had been a dirty detective in Norfolk for many years who had gone to prison. He was accused of the federal government of paying people to fix cases and promised to fix outcomes and promised to get, paying off witnesses or threatening witnesses or whatever. But what no one ever did after he went to prison was look into his entire caseload to see who went to prison behind all of that. And I know that's a totally stunning thing, but they didn't. And I wrote him a letter when he first got to office saying, I'm going to start looking into it. I hope you're not pissed at me. And he called within hours and said, oh my God, if I could partner with you and I said, all I need is the files. And so he's given us all the files. And so students are looking into those cases, and we're finding exactly what you would expect. We're finding people that were threatened, and we're gonna not only try and help the people who are still incarcerated behind that, which there are many, but we're also creating a complaint for the Department of Justice to look into pattern and practice of misconduct. Sexier still is our serial killer project. Many years ago, I represented a guy who was accused of murdering 2 women on the Shenandoah National Park. The case went on, and I was one of many because it was a big case, but it was the wrong guy. And it didn't take us very long to figure out that it was the wrong guy. And then the serial killer, who had never been linked to any crime whatsoever, was caught, and he committed suicide immediately. And instead of diving into looking after what he was up to, they had the feds drop the charges against my client, and then the state picked up the charges and re-indicted him for other things that he didn't do. So we continued representing him until we got him off on that. And then we all sat back and thought, well, now they'll look at the serial killer. Well, nobody ever looked at the serial killer. So the students and I are now looking into, we've collected and created an electronic database of everything that he ever owned or had, including trophies. And he was a traveling salesman and lived in 26 different states and in many other countries. And because we found so many crimes that he probably committed, we started focusing on ones where other people have been accused or convicted. To the tune of, yesterday, it was all over the South Carolina press, there was a little boy who was murdered and sodomized in '89. His stepmother and father were indicted in '89. The charges were thrown out because there was not enough evidence. They were re-indicted in 1992. They were thrown out. And then they were re-indicted 2 months ago. And once we read that they had been indicted again, we wrote and put together, the clinic and I, a letter to the court that was apparently read in court yesterday, saying the serial killer got off a ship the day before that little boy was raped and murdered. And these are the kinds of things he did. And so and I'm told that it is likely now, the lawyers think that the case will be thrown out again. We have 2 cases like that in Portland, Maine. We have several in Central Virginia. We have one in Florida where we're working with lawyers to try and exonerate those people and say, it's this guy. And so that's another project. We have a parole board project where the students have created out of publicly available information from the Virginia Parole Board. They've created an electronic database, which has never existed in Virginia, that we're going to put up and make public for everybody in the world to study the data and see who's getting released and who's not. And the answer to that is no one's getting released at all, as far as I can tell. and I really have to give the students all the credit because I barely know how to type on my computer. So they were unbelievable in coding and figuring out everything, and I'd literally come and take credit for it, but it was that. There's a new statute the feds have just passed called like the violence, it's a statute for families who have cold cases that were mishandled, and that if you can demonstrate how they were mishandled, a federal agency will look into the case, and within 6 months, with a 6-month extension if they need it. And there's many cold case families that have reached out to us to say, I don't know how to use that statute. So we have a team of students that are looking into how to use the statute. We're talking to the legislators and reading the legislative history and putting together a way to help families with cold cases. What else do I do?
A lot.
I do. So anyhow, there's like, what we do is...
The jury stuff?
Oh, yeah. So prosecutors in this area came to us 2 years ago to say, we don't know why, but when we get the master list from the Virginia Supreme Court and then create jury pools from which to pick our juries, they're all white. And we don't know exactly where it goes off the rails because the data is private. So we proposed to TransUnion that they share their data with us in exchange for collaborating on trying to figure out where it goes off the rails. And it's kind of fascinating because all of the assumptions that you probably have that I had about why and where it happens were wrong. It's all in very different ways that it happens. So, and we work in teams mostly, but we also have projects that individuals can do. I try and encourage students to work on a team and do an individual project if that's the way they like to work. But it's very flexible about how you work, and you pick your projects. Like, you rate them when you come in, I put them all out, and then I try and make sure everybody gets sort of what they want.
Bring choice voting.
That's kind of what we do. So anyhow, ask questions.
In the back?
There and then there.
When you were talking about the thing that happened in South Carolina, how often does your clinic respond to current events? And when current events like that happen, what does that look like? How fast does the clinic respond?
You mean like how fast once we read about that?
Yeah, once you read about the boy and then you wrote the book that was running.
So that one, there's two in Portland, Maine, and once I read about each of them, as soon as I got the guy's naval records, that's the truth, and we created this huge timeline of his life using his bank records, his phone records, his everything, and we made this, massive timeline. And then I gave those things to the students and said, like, here's his ship pulling into this harbor. Go, 100-mile radius, because we knew he traveled up to 50 miles to commit crimes. And once we would find that he's there, then we would start going through the debate. And so we basically would put together, how much can we say about this? How much could we honestly say? So the letter we wrote was like a 3-page single-spaced letter saying, I'm not saying that guy did it, but, and I would also say to the lawyers, don't go into court and say, we've got it. Like, go into court and say, in yesterday's case, what they were saying is you can't wait 30 years and continue using the same evidence to re-indict these people without anything new. But what we gave them yesterday was, and also, while you're looking at mom and stepmom and dad, you might want to know that this guy just got to town. And, so if I have enough to be able to say that, like where I think this could be relevant in court, we can't yet say it is. But mostly what we've been able to do is get the lawyers to file motions to do testing. And this guy, more information than you want to know, didn't ejaculate. And so until 2000, when a doctor gratefully gave him Viagra, so his crimes for most of his life were not that. So touch DNA would work, And hairs, now you can, extract DNA without even a root, right? So we can make proposals like that to people. Or in one case, we had credit cards that were found that had latent lifts, and you can get touch DNA out of latent lift, So if there's things they can do, and we can tell them what they are, So we had lawyers from Maine that came with us to go through the evidence, and what they were looking for was things that belonged to that child victim, and found them in the piles of evidence. And then what's amazing is that the prosecutor in Spotsylvania, who has no dog in this fight, he wasn't around when this guy was here, I just went to him and said, I would like to go and spend weeks in your sheriff's office with 5 to 10 students looking, photographing, whatever. And he said, have at, which he didn't have to do that. Like, he could have just said, yeah, you're not a detective. So yeah, it's kind of amazing how one just reaching out and saying, want to help? It's surprising to me how often people say yes.
And I don't know if this was like sort of behind your question at all, but the criminal legal system.
Oh, I answered the wrong question.
No, you did answer it. You did answer it. No, but it got me thinking about how the criminal legal system moves famously slow, right? And there's not I would say there's not like that many moments where you have this like collision of events and you're like, we have the memo, and
right.
But sometimes it happens. And I think some advice that I try to give students when they're thinking about doing clinical work is we work really hard to try to make our cases fit a schedule that is not reflective of the actual system. Like the criminal legal system doesn't take summer break, and the judges do take like crazy vacations, but we don't. It's hard sometimes, and it's kind of artificial, and so you will miss out on opportunities if you're not prioritized. If clinical work is like what you want to do, and you want to get some of the really special experiences out of it that just unfortunately don't operate on a more predictable timeline, you have to prioritize it. You have to take fewer credits in other courses that semester. You want to find time to do it over the summer and be available. And I think both of us try to be like, hey, this is going on. I know you have all this stuff going on, but if you're interested, let's go. Let's hop in the car and let's do it. No pressure, but like, this is awesome. But you kind of have to structure your schedule like that. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on some of the more special opportunities. And Deirdre had good advice during the last session about taking Mondays and Fridays with no classes if it's possible, so that you can do some of the longer trips that clinical work sometimes requires.
Yes.
What year can students start joining this clinic, and is there a time cap on how long you can participate, like number of semesters or anything like that?
So 2 and 3, right, for both of us. So it's 2 and 3 L's for both our for clinics generally. Mm-hmm. Both of us have talked about starting. I did it 1 year, had a 1L project where 1Ls just worked on clinic work, but for pro bono hours, and they tell me, I want to do this amount of time, or I have this amount of time. And then when they freak out right before exams, which they do, we say, don't worry about that, just come back when you're done. And second semester is probably a little better for 1Ls than the first semester, but, and then both of us have clinic students who then their project isn't finished when the clinic ends, and they stay on and do it as a directed research, or they do it as an independent study, or they become our RAs because we have a budget for that.
Yeah.
And so we find a way. And if you want to keep working, because the thing about it, at least for most of my guys, they get attached. They get attached to their client, to the case, to doing it, to winning, because it's all about winning.
Yeah, we only win, pretty much.
Right, we are winners. Does anybody lose more than us?
I know.
Probably
almost
not.
Certainly not.
I only lost more when I was a death penalty attorney.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, so we find ways to keep people who want to keep working.
And I'm starting next semester. I'm going to be encouraging students to take criminal adjudication, or it's called like criminal survey. I can't be right. It'd be a weird name. Criminal law survey. It's but criminal adjudication, the from bail to jail. It enables you to do post-conviction work better because you'll be able to detect ineffective assistance of counsel, Brady violations, and various misconducts in the process. I haven't required it in past semesters, and because of some of our work in Louisiana, which is very time sensitive over the next couple of years to do conviction review and sentencing review with their DA's office, I think it's going to be important. So I think that would position you, and it's not going to be a requirement, but it's going to be strongly encouraged. I don't know if you can take criminal adjudication as an elective your second semester 1L, and I think you might have to wait till your first semester, second year to take that course. And then I think that would help a lot if post-conviction work is what you would like to pursue through the clinic.